I spent most of my childhood desperately trying to seek approval from my dad. I did this in the most easy way I could think of, playing sports. So when I was 11 years old, I had fucking anxiety, damn near panic attacks. Not because of the stupid ass baseball game that didn't matter, but because I was playing for my dad's approval and love. My personality was always more like my mom's, and I think he, deep down, always resented that about me. And it felt like nothing I did was ever good enough for him. I remember when I was 9 years old, I was messing around with my cousins at a family event or whatever, just doing dickhead kid shit. And eventually, the way we were playing, it got too rough. And I was on the ground, and they kept hitting me because they thought it was all in good fun, even though I kept yelling for them to stop and stop. And it got to the point where I was crying in front of everyone and trying to explain what happened to them. And while I was doing this, my dad got pissed off at me and he went to charge at me, and he was mad at me because I let myself get in that situation. I think from a very young age that instilled in me that my dad just wouldn't be there for me when I needed him most. Even though we had our fair share of differences and an upbringing that was kind of far from ideal, it didn't really hit that boiling point until my junior year of high school, when my dad just kind of became this totally unhinged motherfucker. It all kind of started around late February, early March, when my dad wouldn't let my mom come into the house. He basically kicked her out of our house. So I had to basically sneak around to see my own mom in her own house partially, because it wasn't his house. They both kind of split the mortgage. So, and there was another weird thing where one day he was very just high off his ass, and he was just staring at me, and he was like, "You're not my son. You can't be my son." He's like, "You look nothing like me. I don't know who the hell you are." He made me call my mom to ask if she had an affair with the best man at his wedding, because he said I looked more like that guy. And even after all that, it looked like things still could be on good terms by the summer, until they weren't. Around July is when things kind of started to fall apart. There was a weekend where my dad inexplicably just left me alone at the house without a call or a text, which kind of wasn't the first time he did that. On about day 3, I'd say, of this, I just decided to go meet some friends, play some pickup basketball for a little bit, because I didn't know what the fuck was going on. And by the time I got home, I see my dad there with some random broad, and I'm annoyed because I'm like, yo, he just left me out in the fucking house to fend for myself while he's just running around with some random woman that he barely knows. And so I kind of gave that woman the cold shoulder. We didn't really talk about it that day, but the next morning, he woke up and he was just screaming at me at 7 a.m. for this. That next morning when my dad was yelling at me, he was so aggressive and just in my face. It felt like there was no humanity left in him at all. Just pure anger. And that's when I realized this wasn't going to go away. This could only get uglier and worse from here on out, so I decided to pack my bags and leave. Me leaving put me in a weird situation because I wasn't around any of the people that I had spent pretty much my whole life with. I just ended up being stuck in the house, just being depressed, thinking about the situation that had just happened, just sitting around being bitter and resentful and angry towards my dad. And I was doing it for a while. I blamed a lot of the things that happened in my life on my dad. I said, oh, I wouldn't have anxiety if my dad didn't treat me this way. I wouldn't have this if my dad wasn't like this. I wouldn't have this, I wouldn't have this. Ironically enough, I couldn't free myself and start to put together the pieces of my life again until I made the tough decision to finally forgive my dad. I think a lot of people are misunderstanding what forgiveness should be about. It's not necessarily this super selfless thing that you do to just relieve someone of guilt. It's a way for you to put behind the bullshit that happened to you and move forward with your life. To everyone watching right now, you probably think my dad is some complete monster, And that's because I'm explaining the worst of him. I used to think my dad was a monster too, but looking back on it, I think he was just a deeply confused and troubled person who didn't have the best support system around him. Yeah, we had our rough patches, but at the end of the day, the worst thing I can say about him was that he said some pretty mean stuff to me and wanted to hit me a couple times, but never actually did. I guess what I want you guys to take away from this is it's easy to walk around bitter with a chip on your shoulder, but that doesn't really do anything for anyone. At a certain point, we have to realize that biggest obstacle in our life is just a person at the end of the day. Dad, if somehow you're watching this, I want you to know that I do truly forgive you, but I also think that we're better going on our separate paths. Maybe that's counterintuitive, but I like this little peace treaty thing we got going on here. But the reason I don't ever respond to you when you send me emails on my birthday is because I feel like you're doing it to relieve yourself of guilt, not because you appreciate me. I felt like I always had to be what you wanted me to be, but I can't do that. I never could. I do remember some of the good times we had, but I do remember a lot of the bad times we had. I'm just trying to learn from your mistakes so I don't repeat them. I hope you can understand.